Hello and welcome to Relaxing Stories for Sleep. Today, we will dive into a narrative history of China, starting around 7000 BCE and taking us all the way up through today. Close your eyes, relax, and sleep well. Part 1: Origins and the Dawn of Civilization. China's history begins not with emperors and dynasties, but with rivers, mountains, and the slow rhythm of early human life. The two great rivers, the Yellow River in the north and the Yangtze River in the south, carved fertile basins where humanity settled thousands of years ago. These waterways did more than water the crops, they shaped the imagination of a people. The Yellow River, turbulent and prone to devastating floods, inspired myths of heroes who tamed nature's fury. The Yangtze, broad and fertile, nurtured rice cultivation and dense communities. By around 7000 BCE, communities along these rivers had begun to cultivate millet and rice. Archaeologists have uncovered the painted pottery of the Yangshao culture, with its geometric designs, and the sleek black wares of the Longshan culture, which emerged later and showed clear signs of growing social stratification. These societies were not empires, but they were seeds of what would come, small settlements already experimenting with hierarchy, ritual, and technology. Legend says that in those times, 3 sages brought order to the world: Fuxi, who taught people how to fish and domesticate animals; Shenang, who taught them farming and the use of medicinal plants; and Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor, who defeated rival tribes and invented key crafts. Historians take these figures as myth, but their stories reflect a truth: Chinese civilization grew through the patient layering of innovations. The Xia, from myth to history. The Xia dynasty, circa 2100 to 1600 BCE, occupies a shadowy place between legend and history. Later chroniclers, especially Sima Qian in the records of the Grand Historian, told how Wu the Great founded the dynasty after taming the Yellow River floods through monumental labor. Archaeological finds at Erlitou in Henan, palaces, bronze vessels, evidence of stratified society, suggest that something like the Xia may have existed. Whether or not the dynasty unfolded exactly as later historians described, the story of Yu symbolized the Chinese conviction that legitimate rulers must bring order to chaos, above all by mastering the natural world. The Shang, bronze, oracle bones, and ancestors. The Shang dynasty, circa 1600 to 1046 BCE, is the first firmly attested Chinese dynasty. Their kings ruled from fortified cities along the Yellow River plain, commanding warriors armed with bronze weapons and chariots. The Shang elite presided over an intensely ritualistic society. They believed the living were bound to their ancestors, who in turn could influence the will of powerful deities. To communicate with these forces, Shang kings used oracle bones, turtle shells, and ox scapulae inscribed with questions, then heated until they cracked, the patterns interpreted as answers. These inscriptions are the earliest form of Chinese writing. To read them today is to glimpse the thoughts of Bronze Age rulers. Will the harvest be good? Will the king's consort bear a son? Should we launch war against the neighboring tribe? Such concerns are both remote and familiar, a reminder that Chinese civilization stretches back in an unbroken line of written records for over 3 millennia. Shang bronze workers, meanwhile, produced extraordinary ritual vessels decorated with animal motifs, dragons, tigers, owls, that spoke to a world in which human and spirit realms intermingled. The artistry of these objects demonstrated not just technical mastery, but also the power of an elite who commanded labor and resources at an unprecedented scale. The Zhou and the Mandate of Heaven. Around 1046 BCE, the Zhou people from the west overthrew the Shang, declaring that the Shang had lost the Mandate of Heaven, the divine sanction to rule. This concept would become central to Chinese political thought. Unlike the Shang kings, who claimed near-divine status themselves, the Zhou argued that heaven entrusted its mandate to just rulers, but could withdraw it if they governed corruptly or oppressively. This was revolutionary. Rebellion was not only possible but justified if rulers failed their moral duties. The early Western Zhou, 1046 to 771 BCE, saw relative stability. The Zhou kings parceled out land to relatives and loyal lords in a feudal system, securing loyalty through kinship and ritual. Bronze inscriptions from this time reveal a preoccupation with order, hierarchy, and proper ritual performance. Society revolved around ancestral worship and the cyclical rhythms of agriculture. But by the Eastern Zhou period, 770 to 256 BCE, royal power fractured. Rival states competed for dominance in an age of turmoil but also creativity. The Spring and Autumn period, 770 to 476 BCE, saw the rise of powerful regional lords, while the Warring States period, 475 to 221 BCE, brought unrelenting warfare among ambitious kingdoms. It was during these centuries of disunity that Chinese intellectual life flourished. Thinkers struggled to answer the same burning question: how can order be restored in a fractured world? Confucius, 551 to 479 BCE, wandering from court to court, taught that stability came from ethical rulers and virtuous relationships. To him, hierarchy was not oppression but harmony. If each person played their role with integrity, from ruler to peasant, society would flourish. Taoist sages like Laojia counseled retreat from ambition, urging rulers and people alike to live in harmony with the Tao, the natural way of things. Legalists, by contrast, argued that people were selfish and chaotic by nature, and only strict laws and harsh punishments could secure order. These competing visions, moral example, spiritual withdrawal, or rigid law, would echo throughout every dynasty to come. Part 2. The First Empires, Qin and Han. The Qin, unification through fire and iron. By the 3rd century BCE, after centuries of strife, one kingdom outshone the rest. The state of Qin, once considered a rugged frontier power, had perfected military discipline, legalist administration, and agricultural efficiency. Its rulers rewarded farmers and soldiers rather than nobles, cultivating a society that valued merit and strength over birth. At last, in 221 BCE, King Zheng of Qin defeated his rivals and declared himself Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor. For the first time, all under heaven was united under a single ruler. The first emperor's vision was bold, even ruthless. To weld his empire together, he standardized weights, measures, coinage, and even the written script. Roads fanned out from the capital, enabling armies and officials to move swiftly. The Qin also began fortifying northern frontiers with walls that would, centuries later, become linked into the Great Wall. But Qin rule was built on fear. The legalist chancellor Li Si insisted that human beings could not be trusted to virtue. They must be bound by law and punishment. Books deemed subversive were burned, scholars executed. Peasants toiled on massive state projects, canals, roads, palaces, and the emperor's colossal tomb, guarded by the famous terracotta army. Qin Shi Huangdi dreamed of immortality, sending expeditions in search of elixirs. Instead, he died in 210 BCE, leaving behind an exhausted, resentful people. Within 3 years, the dynasty collapsed. The empire Qin created, however, would endure as an idea: China as one land, united under one ruler. The Han, a golden age of culture and power. From the Qin's ashes rose the Han dynasty, 206 BCE to 220 CE, one of the most glorious eras in Chinese history. Its founder, Liu Bang, a commoner who had once been a peasant and minor official, seized power by defeating rival warlords. Declaring himself Emperor Gaozu, he set about tempering the harshness of Qin rule. The Han retained Qin's centralized bureaucracy but infused it with Confucian ideals. Instead of ruling solely by fear, emperors claimed legitimacy through moral leadership. Scholars became officials through merit, selected increasingly by examinations in the Confucian classics. This system, imperfect but transformative, would shape China for 2 millennia. Under the Han emperors, China expanded dramatically. Emperor Wu, R141 to 87 BCE, pushed armies into Central Asia, Korea, and Vietnam. He confronted the nomadic Xiongnu Confederation to the north, sometimes through war, sometimes through diplomacy and marriage alliances. The need to supply armies in distant lands spurred infrastructure, taxation, and colonization. Most importantly, the Han opened the Silk Road. Traders carried silk, lacquerware, and ceramics westward, returning with horses, glass, and ideas. For the first time, Chinese goods reached as far as Rome, and foreign faiths, most notably Buddhism, began trickling into China. Society, culture, and innovation. Life in Han China was layered and complex. At the top stood the emperor and his court. Below them noble families and scholar officials. Most people were peasants, bound to the rhythms of agriculture, paying taxes in grain and labor. Merchants, though vital to the economy, were often viewed with suspicion by Confucian moralists who prized agriculture over profit. Han intellectuals recorded history with unprecedented care. Sima Qian, the Grand Historian, compiled the Shi Ji, Records of the Grand Historian, a sweeping narrative of China's past that established the model for later dynastic histories. Han scientists charted the stars, devised seismographs, and invented paper, transforming learning and administration. Culturally, the Han fostered a synthesis of Confucian ethics, Taoist cosmology, and folk beliefs. Ancestor worship thrived, but new Buddhist teachings found fertile ground among people searching for salvation beyond the hardships of earthly life. Decline and fall. Yet the Han was not invincible. Over time, emperors grew weak, court eunuchs amassed influence, and powerful landowners exploited peasants. Natural disasters and corruption deepened discontent. In 184 CE, the Yellow Turban Rebellion, inspired by Taoist millenarianism, erupted across the countryside, symbolizing a broader collapse of imperial authority. By 220 CE, the dynasty was gone. China fractured once more, ushering in centuries of division. But the Han legacy endured. The Chinese still call themselves the Han people, and their script the Han characters. The empire's ideals of bureaucracy, Confucian ethics, and cultural unity would remain touchstones for every dynasty to come. Part 3. Division and the Age of Buddhism, 220 to 589 CE. The Three Kingdoms, Romance and Reality. The collapse of the Han left a vacuum filled by warlords. China splintered into the three kingdoms, Wei, Shu, and Wu, a time immortalized in legend and literature. The romance of the three kingdoms, written centuries later, turned generals and strategists into cultural icons. Cao Cao the cunning, Liu Bei the benevolent, Zhuge Liang the brilliant strategist. In reality, the era was brutal. Endless warfare devastated the countryside. Populations fled southward, and society fractured. Yet it was also an age of resilience. Southern China grew as migrants carried northern traditions into new lands, and regional cultures flourished. Northern and Southern dynasties. For nearly 4 centuries after Han's fall, China remained divided. In the north, nomadic peoples, Xiongnu, Xianbei, and others, established kingdoms on Chinese soil. Many adopted Chinese culture, intermarried, and ruled as barbarian dynasties that were, in practice, profoundly Sinicized. In the south, Chinese dynasties clung to power around the Yangtze Basin, fostering refined courts and artistic traditions. This was a time of cultural fusion. Steppe peoples introduced new fashions, music, and horses. The south became a crucible of scholarship and calligraphy, and above all, Buddhism began its dramatic rise. The spread of Buddhism. Carried by Silk Road monks from India and Central Asia, Buddhism found a receptive audience in divided China. Its message of suffering, compassion, and salvation resonated in an age of chaos. Monasteries sprouted across the land, becoming centers of learning, charity, and power. Translation bureaus in cities like Luoyang rendered Indian sutras into Chinese, often with the help of foreign monks like Kumaragaiva, who mastered Chinese idioms and gave the texts elegant form. Buddhist art flourished, producing the stunning cave temples of Dunhuang, Yungang, and Longmen, where serene Buddhas gazed from rock walls as worshippers chanted in flickering candlelight. Over time, Buddhism blended with Taoist and Confucian traditions, shaping Chinese thought and culture in ways that would endure for centuries. Yet, despite these rich cultural achievements, political fragmentation remained a constant strain. It would take the ruthless energy of a new dynasty, the Sui, to reunite the land. Part 4, the Sui and Tang, Reunification and the Cosmopolitan Age. The Sui, brief but pivotal, 581 to 618 CE. After nearly 4 centuries of fragmentation, the Sui dynasty emerged to reunify China. Founded by Yang Jian, who took the throne as Emperor Wen, the Sui resembled the Qin 2 centuries earlier. Short-lived, harsh, but enormously important. The Sui restored centralized administration and laid the groundwork for a new age. Most famously, they built the Grand Canal, an engineering marvel linking the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. This waterway allowed grain from the fertile south to feed northern capitals and armies, binding the regions more tightly than ever before. But the Sui overreached. Emperor Yang, Wen's son, launched massive construction projects and reckless wars against Korea. Exhausted peasants rose in revolt, and in 618 the dynasty collapsed. Yet its reunification of North and South prepared the way for one of China's most glorious ages, the Tang. The Tang, a golden age, 618 to 907 CE. The Tang dynasty is often remembered as the high point of Chinese civilization, cosmopolitan, confident, and creative. Founded by Li Wen, who became Emperor Gaozu, but most famously consolidated by his son Emperor Taizong, the Tang established a model of imperial governance admired for centuries. Governance and expansion. The Tang refined the civil service examination system, expanding the recruitment of officials through merit rather than birth. Scholar officials versed in Confucian classics staffed the bureaucracy, forming a governing elite whose ethos was duty, learning, and service. Militarily, the Tang expanded China's frontiers deep into Central Asia. Victories like the Battle of Talas, 751 CE, brought Chinese forces into contact and conflict with the Abbasid Caliphate. Although the Tang lost Talas, the encounter facilitated the westward spread of paper-making technology, a turning point in world history. Chang'an, a world city. The Tang capital, Chang'an, modern Xi'an, was the largest city in the world, a metropolis of perhaps 1 million people. Its grid of wide avenues and bustling markets hummed with life. Merchants from Persia, India, and Central Asia traded spices, jewels, and horses. Sogdian musicians entertained at court, while Buddhist pilgrims like Xuanzang journeyed to India and back, bringing scriptures and stories. The city was a microcosm of global exchange, foreign fashions, exotic foods, new religions all mingled. To walk through Chang'an was to glimpse the ancient world at its most cosmopolitan. The age of poetry and art. The Tang is also remembered for its cultural brilliance, especially poetry. Figures like Li Bai, whose verse soared with Taoist mysticism and wine-soaked wonder, and Du Fu, whose poems chronicled war, poverty, and human suffering, remain beloved today. The Tang also produced exquisite Buddhist sculpture, landscape painting, and ceramics that defined classical Chinese aesthetics. Buddhism's zenith and challenge. Buddhism flourished under Tang patronage, with vast monasteries commanding land, wealth, and loyalty. Pilgrims and translators enriched Buddhist literature, and new schools like Chan, Zen, began to emerge. But Buddhism's power provoked backlash. In the 840s, Emperor Wuzong ordered the suppression of monasteries, forcing thousands of monks and nuns back into lay life. Buddhism survived, but in a more subdued form, its grandeur tempered. The Anlushan Rebellion and decline. The Tang reached its peak under Emperor Xuanzong, r. 712 to 756, whose court glittered with culture and refinement. Yet his infatuation with Yang Guifei, one of China's famed beauties, and the rise of the general Anlushan led to disaster. In 755, Anlushan rebelled, plunging the empire into chaos. The rebellion lasted nearly a decade, killing millions and shattering Tang authority. Though the dynasty lingered another century, it never fully recovered. Regional warlords gained autonomy, and in 907 the Tang fell, giving way to another age of fragmentation. Part 5. The Song and Yuan, Innovation and Conquest. The Song dynasty, 960 to 1279, prosperity without power. After half a century of turmoil, the Song dynasty reunified much of China. Its rulers were cultured, pragmatic, and devoted to civil administration over military conquest. This choice created a paradox. The Song oversaw one of the most economically and culturally dynamic periods in Chinese history, yet remained militarily vulnerable. The Economic Revolution. The Song era witnessed what some historians call a medieval economic revolution. Agriculture boomed with the introduction of fast-ripening champa rice from Vietnam, allowing multiple harvests per year. Populations surged past 100 million. Cities flourished as centers of trade, with marketplaces offering goods from across Asia. The Song pioneered the use of paper money, developed sophisticated credit systems, and oversaw explosive growth in commerce, science, and technology. The Song were astonishing innovators. They advanced gunpowder weaponry, revolutionized warfare with early rockets and bombs. They perfected compass navigation, spurring maritime trade. The invention of movable type printing accelerated literacy and scholarship. Astronomers mapped the heavens with remarkable precision, and engineers built marvels like the giant astronomical clock tower of Susong. Art and philosophy. Culturally, the Song produced sublime landscape painting, misty mountains and winding rivers in inkwash, evoking harmony between man and nature. Neo-Confucianism, led by Zhu Zi, reinterpreted the Confucian classics, blending them with metaphysical elements from Taoism and Buddhism. This philosophy would dominate East Asia for centuries. Vulnerability and fall. Despite their brilliance, the Song struggled against nomadic neighbors. In 1127, the Jurchen Jin dynasty conquered northern China, forcing the court south to Hangzhou. The southern Song thrived commercially but remained militarily weak. In the 13th century, the Mongols under Kublai Khan invaded. By 1279, the Song were extinguished, and a new foreign dynasty ruled China. The Yuan dynasty, 1271 to 1368, Mongol rule. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, declared the Yuan dynasty, the first time all of China was ruled by non-Han conquerors. The Yuan integrated China into the vast Mongol Empire, stretching from Korea to Europe. This created an unprecedented flow of goods and ideas across Eurasia. Marco Polo's accounts of Yuan China dazzled Europe with tales of its wealth, paper currency, and efficient administration. The Yuan adopted Chinese-style governance but maintained ethnic hierarchies, privileging Mongols and Central Asians over Han Chinese. Heavy taxation, floods, and plague, including the Black Death, fueled discontent. By the 14th century, peasant uprisings like the Red Turban Rebellion erupted. In 1368, the Yuan collapsed, replaced by a new native dynasty, the Ming. Part 6, the Ming Dynasty, Restoration, Voyages and Decline, 1368 to 1644. Founding the Ming, from rebel to emperor. The collapse of the Yuan left China in chaos, with rival rebel factions rising across the land. Among them was a former Buddhist novice and peasant soldier, Zhu Yuanzhang. Hardened by years of famine and war, Zhu proved a shrewd strategist and ruthless leader. His Red Turban forces seized Nanjing, and in 1368 he declared himself the Honghe Emperor, founder of the Ming dynasty. The Ming Restoration was one of reclamation, of Chinese rule after Mongol domination, of Confucian traditions, and of order after decades of turmoil. Honghe built a highly centralized state, abolishing the post of chief minister to keep power in the emperor's hands. He relied on secret police, harsh laws, and a rigid social hierarchy to maintain control. His paranoia grew over time. Suspected officials were executed by the thousands, but his reforms gave the Ming longevity, order and orthodoxy. Ming governance rested on the Confucian bureaucracy. The civil service exams, abolished under the Yuan, returned in full force, producing a scholar-official elite steeped in classical learning. Neo-Confucian orthodoxy dominated intellectual life, emphasizing order, hierarchy, and morality. Agriculture was encouraged through tax relief and land redistribution, fostering population growth. By the 15th century, China's population may have reached 150 million. Craft industries, silk weaving, porcelain production, flourished, and cities like Nanjing, Suzhou, and later Beijing grew into vibrant urban centers. The Yongle Emperor and the Great Projects. One of the Ming's most remarkable rulers was Emperor Yongle, of 1402 to 1424, who seized power from his nephew in a bloody coup. Energetic and ambitious, Yongle moved the capital to Beijing, where he constructed the Forbidden City, an architectural masterpiece of imperial grandeur. He also strengthened and expanded the Great Wall, making it the formidable barrier known today. But Yonglè's most audacious project lay at sea. The voyages of Zheng He. Between 1405 and 1433, the Ming launched a series of grand maritime expeditions under the command of Admiral Zheng He, a Muslim eunuch from Yunnan. With fleets of hundreds of ships, some of them massive treasure ships dwarfing European caravels, Zheng He sailed through Southeast Asia, across the Indian Ocean, to India, Arabia, and the coast of Africa. These voyages projected Ming power and prestige. Zheng He returned with envoys, exotic animals like giraffes, and tribute from far-off rulers. The expeditions demonstrated that China possessed not only the will, but the capability to dominate maritime Asia. And yet, after Zheng He's death, the voyages ceased. Court officials, wary of expense and suspicious of foreign entanglements, persuaded emperors to abandon the oceanic enterprise. China turned inward, just as Europe was beginning its own age of exploration. Cultural brilliance. The Ming era shone culturally. The Yongle Encyclopedia compiled knowledge in tens of thousands of volumes. Ming porcelain, delicate blue and white wares, became world famous, exported across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Fiction flourished, with vernacular novels like Journey to the West and The Water Margin becoming enduring classics. The Ming also saw the flourishing of painting and decorative arts, supported by a wealthy gentry and merchant class. Urban culture expanded, with theatre, storytelling, and popular literature becoming staples of city life. Decline and fall. Yet beneath Ming's splendor lay fragility. Eunuchs at court gained enormous influence, often corrupt and self-serving. Tax burdens fell heavily on peasants, while landowners consolidated estates. Environmental stresses, including the Little Ice Age, worsened harvests. By the 17th century, piracy, internal revolts, and fiscal strain from defending borders undermined the dynasty. When the Manchu tribes rose in the northeast, the Ming were too weak to resist. In 1644, rebel forces under Li Zicheng stormed Beijing. The last Ming emperor, Chongshan, hanged himself on Coal Hill behind the Forbidden City. Within months, Manchu armies swept in, founding a new dynasty, the Qing. Part 7. The Qing Dynasty, Empire at its Zenith and Crisis of Modernity, 1644 to 1911. The rise of the Manchus. The Qing dynasty was founded not by Han Chinese but by the Manchus, a semi-nomadic people from Northeast Asia. Skilled horsemen and archers, the Manchus organized a formidable military system known as the Eight Banners. Though foreign conquerors, they styled themselves heirs to Chinese tradition, adopting Confucian governance and ritual. Under the early Qing, the empire not only stabilized but expanded dramatically. Emperor Kongxi, r. 1661 to 1722, one of China's greatest rulers, consolidated control, defeated rebellions, and opened the empire to missionaries and scholars. His grandson, Emperor Qianlong, r. 1735 to 1796, presided over the Qing at its zenith. Vast, wealthy, and cultured, expansion and power. The Qing created the largest Chinese empire in history, incorporating Tibet, Xinjiang, Mongolia, and Taiwan. They subdued steppe nomads once and for all, ensuring China would never again face a Mongol-style invasion. The population soared to over 300 million by the 18th century, sustained by New World crops like maize and sweet potatoes. The Qing court patronized art, literature, and scholarship. The complete collection of 4 treasuries, an enormous literary compendium, reflected imperial confidence. Porcelain, silk, and paintings reached new heights of refinement. Encounters with the West. Yet the very wealth of Qing China drew foreign attention. European traders coveted tea, silk, and porcelain. But China demanded payment in silver, creating trade imbalances. The British East India Company sought to redress this through the sale of opium, sparking a crisis. When the Qing attempted to suppress the trade, Britain launched the Opium Wars, 1839-42, 1856-60. Defeated, China was forced into humiliating unequal treaties, ceding Hong Kong, opening treaty ports, and granting extraterritorial rights to foreigners. The Qing's inability to resist Western powers revealed deep weaknesses: bureaucratic corruption, military backwardness, and a rigid social order resistant to reform. Rebellion and decline. Internal unrest compounded foreign humiliation. The Taiping Rebellion, 1850-64, led by a heterodox Christian visionary, engulfed southern China in one of the deadliest civil wars in history, costing perhaps 20 million lives. Later uprisings, including the Boxer Rebellion, 1899-1901, reflected popular anger at both foreign domination and Qing weakness. Reform efforts, the self-strengthening movement, attempts at modernization, achieved little. By the early 20th century, nationalist revolutionaries, led by Sun Yat-sen, sought to overthrow the dynasty altogether. In 1911, after the Wuchang Uprising, the Qing collapsed. Over 2 millennia of imperial rule ended. Part 8. The Republican Era and the Turmoil of the 20th Century, 1912 to 1949. The Fall of the Dragon Throne. In 1911, the Qing dynasty crumbled under the weight of foreign incursions, internal rebellion, and nationalist revolution. On January 1, 1912, the Republic of China was proclaimed in Nanjing, with Sun Yat-sen as its provisional president. Sun, a Western-educated Christian doctor turned revolutionary, envisioned a new China built on his 3 principles of the people: nationalism, freeing China from foreign domination; democracy, establishing representative government; people's livelihood, improving social and economic welfare. Yet the fledgling republic was fragile. Real power soon fell to Yuan Shikai, a former Qing general who maneuvered to become president. Yuan's attempt to restore monarchy in his own person in 1915 discredited him, and after his death in 1916, China fractured into the warlord era. The warlord era, 1916 to 1927. China splintered into regions ruled by rival warlords, each commanding private armies and taxing local populations. Beijing remained the nominal capital, but its government was weak and corrupt. For ordinary people, life meant constant instability, shifting rulers, banditry, famine, and violence. At the same time, new ideas spread. Students and intellectuals, disillusioned with traditional Confucianism and alarmed by foreign encroachment, looked to Western democracy, liberalism, and increasingly, Marxism. The May 4th movement of 1919 was a turning point, sparked by outrage at the Versailles Treaty, which transferred German concessions in Shandong to Japan rather than returning them to China. Protests erupted in Beijing and beyond. The movement became a broader cultural and intellectual awakening, rejecting feudal traditions and calling for science, democracy, and national renewal. From this ferment emerged new political forces: the Nationalist Party, Kuomintang, KMT, reorganized by Sun Yat-sen, and the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, founded in 1921 in Shanghai. The Nationalist Revolution and Civil War. With Soviet aid, Sun reorganized the KMT along Leninist lines, forging an alliance with the Young Communist Party. Together they launched the Northern Expedition, 1926-28, to unify China by defeating warlords. After Sun's death in 1925, leadership passed to Chiang Kai-shek, a military commander. The expedition succeeded in capturing much of China, and in 1927 Chiang broke with the communists in a bloody purge, massacring leftists in Shanghai. The fragile alliance collapsed into civil war. Chiang established a nationalist government in Nanjing, recognized internationally as the Republic of China. Yet his regime struggled with corruption, inflation, and continued warlord resistance. Meanwhile, the communists retreated to rural bases, experimenting with peasant mobilization under leaders like Mao Zedong. The Long March. By the early 1930s, Chiang launched encirclement campaigns against the communists, driving them from their Jiangxi base. In 1934-35, the Red Army undertook the epic Long March, a year-long retreat across 6,000 miles of mountains, rivers, and hostile territory, from southeast China to remote Yan'an in the northwest. Though only a fraction of the marchers survived, the ordeal forged the communist movement's identity, with Mao Zedong emerging as its paramount leader. The Long March became a foundational myth of communist China, a symbol of endurance, sacrifice, and revolutionary destiny. The War of Resistance against Japan, 1937 to 1945. China's political struggles were interrupted by a greater threat: Japanese aggression. Japan had seized Manchuria in 1931, establishing the puppet state of Montecuo under the last Qing emperor, Puyi. In 1937, full-scale war erupted after the Marco Polo Bridge incident near Beijing. Japanese forces swept into northern and eastern China, committing atrocities such as the Nanjing Massacre, where hundreds of thousands were killed. Jiang's nationalist government resisted but was forced inland to Chongqing. The Communists, meanwhile, expanded influence in rural areas through guerrilla warfare and social reforms. Both sides nominally united against Japan but mistrusted each other deeply. China endured 8 years of brutal conflict, with tens of millions displaced or dead. The war drained the nation but also elevated China's international standing as one of the Allies. The Civil War resumes, 1945 to 1949. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the uneasy alliance collapsed. Civil war resumed between nationalists and communists. Despite US aid to Chiang, his government was weakened by inflation, corruption, and declining morale. The communists, disciplined and backed by peasant support, steadily gained ground. By 1949, communist forces captured Beijing and Nanjing. On October 1, 1949, Mao Zedong stood atop Tiananmen Gate in Beijing and proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic of China, PRC. Chiang Kai-shek and the remnants of his government retreated to Taiwan, maintaining the Republic of China there. A new era in Chinese history had begun. Part 9: The People's Republic of China, Revolution, Turmoil and Reform, 1949 present. Founding a new state. On October 1, 1949, Mao Zedong stood in Beijing's Tiananmen Square and proclaimed, "The Chinese people have stood up." After a century of foreign invasion, warlordism, and civil war, the communists promised a new China, unified, independent, and socialist. The People's Republic of China, PRC, quickly consolidated power. Land reform redistributed estates from landlords to peasants, often violently. Millions of landlords were denounced, dispossessed, or executed in mass campaigns. Industry and banking were nationalized. The CCP established control through a vast bureaucracy, the People's Liberation Army, PLA, and neighborhood committees that monitored daily life. Women's rights were dramatically expanded, arranged marriages were discouraged, foot binding had already faded, and the 1950 marriage law promoted gender equality. Education campaigns sought to eradicate illiteracy. China also entered the Cold War. In 1950, Chinese troops intervened in the Korean War, pushing back US forces and securing North Korea as a buffer state. This won Mao prestige but hardened hostility with the West. Mao's socialist transformation. By the mid-1950s, the PRC launched a Soviet-style first five-year plan, emphasizing heavy industry with Soviet advisors' assistance. Urban growth surged, but rural areas remained poor. In 1956, Mao briefly encouraged intellectual debate in the 100 Flowers campaign, but when criticism of the party flourished, he reversed course, persecuting critics in the anti-rightist campaign, sending hundreds of thousands to labor camps. The Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 1961. Seeking to leapfrog the West, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward, a radical campaign to collectivize agriculture and promote backyard steel production. Villages were reorganized into vast people's communes, and peasants were mobilized for massive public works. The results were disastrous. Unrealistic production targets, combined with poor planning and inflated reporting, led to catastrophic famine. Between 1959 and 1961, tens of millions starved to death, one of the deadliest man-made disasters in history. The Great Leap shattered Mao's prestige temporarily, as more pragmatic leaders like Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping stepped in to restore stability. The Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976. Fearing he was losing control, Mao launched the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution in 1966. Calling on youth to attack capitalist roaders and revive revolutionary zeal, he unleashed the Red Guards, militant students who denounced teachers, officials, and even family members as enemies of the revolution. China descended into chaos. Schools closed, cultural relics were destroyed, and intellectuals were humiliated or exiled. Factional fighting erupted across cities and provinces. Millions were persecuted, countless lives were ruined. Mao used the upheaval to sideline rivals and reassert dominance, but at immense social cost. By the early 1970s, the PLA under Lin Biao and Premier Zhou Enlai restored some order. In a surprise turn, Mao opened ties with the United States. In 1972, US President Richard Nixon visited Beijing, marking China's return to the international stage. When Mao died in 1976, China was exhausted. The Gang of Four, radical followers including Mao's widow Jiang Qing, were arrested, ending the Cultural Revolution. Deng Xiaoping and the Reform Era. Into this vacuum stepped Deng Xiaoping, a pragmatic veteran twice purged during Mao's campaigns. Deng charted a new course: reform and opening up. Starting in 1978, Deng dismantled communes, allowing peasants to farm for profit under the household responsibility system. Special economic zones, SEZs, along the coast invited foreign investment. Market reforms coexisted with party control, producing astonishing growth. China shifted from isolation to integration with the global economy. Cities boomed, industries modernized, and hundreds of millions were lifted from poverty. The transformation was unprecedented in speed and scale, but reforms also bred inequality, corruption, and discontent. In 1989, student-led protests in Beijing's Tiananmen Square called for democracy and clean government. The movement swelled until, on June 4, the PLA crushed it with force. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, were killed. The massacre left a lasting scar and signaled that while China embraced markets, it would not permit political liberalization. The rise of modern China. Despite international condemnation after 1989, China's economic rise continued. Under Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, and later Xi Jinping, the country grew into the world's second-largest economy. Massive urbanization, infrastructure projects like the Three Gorges Dam, and membership in the World Trade Organization, 2001, integrated China deeply into global systems. By the 21st century, China had become the world's factory, manufacturing goods for global markets. A new middle class emerged, consumer culture flourished, and technology firms like Huawei, Tencent, and Alibaba rose. China also projected power abroad through the Belt and Road Initiative, building trade and infrastructure networks across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Militarily, it expanded its navy and asserted claims in the South China Sea. Challenges of the 21st century. Yet China faces challenges. Inequality between coastal cities and rural hinterlands remains stark. Environmental degradation, pollution, deforestation, climate change poses existential risks. Demographic pressures loom, with an aging population and shrinking workforce following decades of the one-child policy. Politically, the CCP under Xi Jinping has tightened control, promoting nationalism, expanding surveillance, and eliminating term limits. Xinjiang and Tibet remain flashpoints of ethnic and cultural tension. Taiwan remains unresolved, its de facto independence a source of constant tension with Beijing. Still, China's transformation from the devastation of the 19th and 20th centuries to a global powerhouse of the 21st is one of history's most extraordinary turnarounds. From the first Neolithic villages along the Yellow River to today's megacities of glass and steel, China's history is a story of resilience and reinvention. Dynasties rose and fell, emperors ruled in splendor and despair, ideas like Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, and Marxism reshaped society. Through conquest and collapse, revolution and renewal, the Chinese people endured. Today, China stands at a crossroads, proud of its ancient civilization, emboldened by its modern resurgence, yet facing the challenges of globalization, technology, and sustainability. However the future unfolds, The arc of China's past, stretching across millennia, ensures that its story will continue to shape the world.